Any health-related information on the following show provides general information only. Content presented on any show by any host or guest should not be substituted for a doctor's advice. Always consult your physician before beginning any new diet, exercise, or treatment program.
Hello and welcome to 5 to Thrive Live, a podcast about thriving for those who have been affected by cancer and chronic disease. I'm Dr. Lisa Schuler and I co-host with my good friend Carolyn Gazella. You can find all of our past podcasts on any major podcast outlet as well as on our website, ithriveplan.com. Tonight, I will be talking with Jeane LaDeana, and Dr. Jeane is a naturopathic doctor, a fellow of the American Board of Naturopathic Oncology, and the founder of Nolia Naturopathic Medicine. And Dr. Jeane specializes in supporting women through menopause and cancer care, helping them to navigate major life and health transitions with clarity and confidence. She was named Physician of the Year in 2025 by the American Association of Naturopathic Physicians for her leadership with the Integrative Healers Action Network, a nonprofit that provides medical support, particularly with firefighters and first responders during natural disasters. Her work is deeply rooted in a holistic, compassionate approach to healing that looks at the health of individuals, communities, and the environment as an interconnected whole. And in fact, that is what we're going to be talking about. We're going to be talking about the environmental risks to breast health and really thinking about how we can support the health of breast tissue, particularly, of course, when we're thinking about breast cancer prevention from an environmental perspective. So before we do that, let me thank our sponsors. First, Cetria, a patented form of glutathione, clinically proven to raise blood glutathione levels. Glutathione is the master antioxidant in the body, which is how we defend ourselves against free radical and free radical-induced damage. And glutathione is also involved in respiratory health, and you can learn more at cetriaglutathione.com. We also thank ProThrivers Wellness Supplements, including ProThrivers Wellness Brain, which is a product designed specifically for thrivers that contains cognizin for memory, focus, and attention, as well as some other brain-supporting nutrients and herbs. And you can find ProThrivers Wellness Brain online at pureformulas.com. And finally, Dr. Ohhira's Probiotics, which is a best-selling probiotic for over 3 decades. It has 12 probiotic strains, all of which are shelf-stable without refrigeration because of a unique 3-year fermentation process. And you can learn more at drohhiraprobiotics.com. Well, hello, LaDeana. Welcome to 5 to Thrive Live.
Thank you. And thank you for that kind introduction. I'm really excited to be here.
Well, I'm excited to have you here, and especially about this topic. So I think before we jump into the connections, it's important that we kind of get on the same page about what we mean by environmental toxins. So what does this include?
Yeah, it's a really great place to start. When we say environmental toxins, we're really referring to everyday chemicals we're exposed to in the air, the water, food, plastics, cleaning products, and even our cosmetic products. These are chemicals that can interfere with our hormones and may influence cancers like breast cancer, but we are learning might even be linked to the rising rates of colon cancer in younger adults. Yeah, I like to always add here too, it's just one piece of a really big, nuanced picture, but it's an important piece that we do actually have some control over, and small changes over time can really make a big difference in reducing our exposures.
Yeah, I think that is a really important part because of what you just said. So I want to repeat a little bit of that, which is that it's one part. When we think about cancer, it's often people ask themselves, how did I get this? What caused this? And it's never one thing. I suppose it could be, but it's for the most part a multifactorial situation. So lots of things, typically over a long period of time, culminate together to create the derangements and the dysregulations that we see in tumors. And I think the environment as a source of some of these dysregulating factors can sometimes get forgotten. So this is an important topic. Now, one of the ways that environmental toxins can cause this disruption is by being what we call endocrine disruptors. So can you give us some kind of a lowdown on what that means, and then give us some examples of chemical endocrine disruptors?
Yeah, definitely. This is really important, and I might spend a little more time here because this is coming up more and more as we navigate living in our increasingly toxic world. So, what are they? What do we mean when we say endocrine disruptor? We mean it's a chemical that can interfere with the body's hormone system. Hormones like estrogen, testosterone, and even thyroid hormone. So, endocrine disruptors can mimic, they can block, or they can even confuse the messages our hormones are trying to communicate within the body. Some can act like hormones themselves and overstimulate the signal it's sending. Others block hormones from working properly, and some can actually change how they're made, broken down, or transported within our body. And so I think the other part of the question is, how does it relate to our cancer risk? Certain cancers like breast, prostate, ovarian, testicular, they're influenced by hormones. So if a chemical is mimicking estrogen or altering that hormone balance over time, it may contribute to an increased risk and risk of recurrence, especially with long-term or large exposures to particular toxins like endocrine disruptors. With that said, it's important to keep perspective because the risk does depend on the dose, the timing, the duration, and there's some special circumstances like early life exposures during pregnancy and childhood may be more impactful. And then also during sensitive life changes like menopause and during survivorship. And remember, not every single exposure leads to harm. Our bodies are really designed to help us eliminate some of these exposures. And so I think the other part of that I heard was, what are some examples? And there's some really well-known endocrine disruptors that I'm certain people have heard of, one of which is BPA. This is found in some plastics still, like water bottles, storage containers, and it's still found in the lining of metal cans. And often unknown exposures to BPA from receipts. And so something to consider there. And then phthalates, which are used to soften plastics, we still see in PVC, vinyl flooring, those weird crinkly shower curtain liners, scented cleaners, air fresheners, food packaging, and even toys and synthetic fragrances. Parabens is another big class we'll talk about a little bit more too, but this is a particular concern because it's used as a preservative to prevent mold and bacteria in skincare and personal care products. Also in foods, and I think even in some amount in pharmaceuticals. So it's often found in makeup, sunscreen, baby products, and processed foods. The other one is getting a lot of buzz right now. This is our PFAS, forever chemicals. This is what has been found in nonstick cookware, our rainproof or water resistant fabrics. And this is even household furniture. I would lump into this category too. Some food packaging like microwave popcorn bags, pizza boxes, even dental floss, which is frightening.
Wow.
And so these forever chemicals are found globally in the air, the water, the soil, fish, and even human blood. And there are two other important categories here: pesticides, which is used commonly in agriculture, and we're exposed due to ag runoff. And then we're thinking also about dioxins, which are pollutants from industry and burning, just wood, coal, the normal things. And so these two things we think about accumulating in high fat foods like dairy, fish, meat. And they're a concern for many, many years, sometimes even after a particular pesticide, for instance, has been banned.
Yeah. Wow. I mean, so many.
Right.
So, I think it's important to go back to something you mentioned earlier, which is that not all of these things are immediately going to cause irreversible damage. Our bodies can and do detoxify them. And one of our sponsors, in fact, that I mentioned, glutathione, is heavily involved in detoxifying a lot of these chemicals. So I just want to, lest people feel overwhelmed, there are ways that we're managing these, and we'll come back to that. But let's actually jump for a moment. Speaking of glutathione, which is a really good chelator of heavy metals, let's talk a little bit about heavy metals: cadmium, lead, mercury, arsenic. These are other environmental factors linked to various cancers, including breast cancer. So what's going on there? Like how's that link been established, and where do we, especially as adults, since mostly adults are listening to the show, where do we tend to come into contact with heavy metals?
Mm-hmm. Well, I mean, they're ubiquitous. First of all, they're naturally occurring, and we think about them being more harmful when they start to build up in the body over time. And so we worry about them because they can cause DNA damage, leading to mutations. They can also be endocrine or hormone disruptors, especially mercury in particular. They can cause oxidative stress, creating inflammation in the body. And then again, we're back to that long-term accumulation over time. And so some of the places we're exposed as adults that we want to think about, I keep coming back to fire because I live on the West Coast in California, and this is an area where I spend a lot of my time volunteering, and the exposure risk is high. I am working with firefighters who are putting out burning Teslas, and so we're seeing increased risk of exposure to cadmium in our communities and also in these special populations because it is accumulated in batteries, plastics. We see it in fertilizer, and then of course in burning materials. And cadmium can mimic estrogen as well in the body, and so particular concern. Arsenic we see in poor air quality in homes, fires, and this is a byproduct from mining as well. And then I want to bring awareness to treated lumber and pesticides because these can contain arsenic. Lead and mercury, we know about them as being strongly linked to neurological effects. But we know mercury acts as an endocrine disruptor. It's also called a metalloestrogen, and it can lead to the proliferation of estrogen receptor positive breast cancer cells. And just to bring it back, that the takeaway here isn't to panic, it's awareness. And I always talk about with my patients, it's about reducing your risk, not eliminating completely, because it's just not realistic in the world that we live in. And I agree, glutathione is a really important addition for a lot of folks, especially if they're high risk or had a high exposure. So yeah, I think one of the things we want to talk about too is how do we reduce that exposure risk? And one of the big things I think about is water filters in the home, whether you live, especially if you live in an older home or you have well water, but I would argue everyone. And then I think varying the types of vegetables, fruits, grains that we're eating, just so that we are not overexposed to a particular thing. And then making sure that we're washing fruits and vegetables and avoiding smoke is a big one because it's a major source of exposure. So simple stuff like air filters in the home, avoiding cigarette smoke, checking the air quality before you go out for a walk or a run or exercise outdoors.
Yep, very good advice. And, minimizing exposure is definitely something that we can do and should do as much as we can. So those are good, actionable things. So what about, I think we should just focus in a little bit on plastics, and we might as well stick with the P's and talk about pesticides too. And I think pesticides particularly interesting given right now there's a pretty strong grassroots effort to really have our food supply reconsider how we grow food and to move towards more organic farming. So what is the deal with pesticides and plastics, both in terms of breast health?
Yeah, I guess the short answer is there's evidence that pesticides and chemicals and plastics absolutely affect our health and increase our cancer risk. And what we really know about pesticides, I mean, we could talk about this for ages. I'm a gardener. This is really important to me in my own life and something I work really hard to reduce exposure around. Um, but the evidence right now is in strongest in people who have really high exposure, like the folks who work in agriculture. And I would argue also people in my community where I live, which is a big wine industry community, and there's a lot of pesticide exposure here as well.
Mm-hmm.
So these pesticides are linked to lymphoma, leukemia, and breast cancer. And some can act like endocrine disruptors. Um, and then we get into just in general how this is impacting our food and our earth and our ability to maintain healthy soil for high nutrient dense food over the years, long after we're no longer here. So plastics will throw in the conversation too, because we use them every single day. It's impossible to avoid them. I did an experiment once when I was in medical school. I tried to take 1 month and avoid all plastic. It was one of the hardest things I've ever done. It was almost impossible.
Yeah.
Even that hummus that I love to eat for lunch, you can't buy that. You have to make it from scratch if you want to plastic. So plastics are concerning because of the chemicals that are in them, like BPA, phthalates. We already talked about how they mimic hormones and could influence things like our breast cancer risk, our breast health, fertility, metabolism. The evidence is still evolving. We don't really have all of the information or answers right now, but we do understand, and most organizations are recommending that we really reduce unnecessary exposure.
Mm-hmm. Yes. Wow. And yeah, I can't even imagine actually, as you talked about your experiment, I don't know that I could get rid of plastic as much as I try to avoid it. Yeah, there's so many ways in which I interact with plastic, of course. Okay, so here's kind of an interesting question. AI is all over the place, digital technology advancing like crazy. Does this impact our exposure to environmental toxins?
Oh my gosh, yes. This is so easy to forget. Our digital lives have a real environmental imprint. Our AI, like ChatGPT, cloud systems, they rely on huge data centers that use a lot of energy and cooling, which contributes to air pollution and greenhouse gases. There's also the hardware component of our phones, laptops, servers, which require mining, which we've already talked about earlier. And this can sometimes expose particular communities to high levels of toxic substances. Over time, those environmental exposures can impact our public health and cancer risk. The real takeaway here is the hope that we all have a better understanding of how our digital lives are a part of a bigger environmental system, and the increased demand for power that can increase our energy use, our choices, and how that's all really connected to the health of our planet, if it isn't obvious already.
Yeah, and I would add that a lot of those data centers are in lower socioeconomic neighborhoods, so there's a disproportionate effect of some of the local issues related to those data centers, which is just something to keep in mind as well. So let's kind of switch gears a little bit and talk about how we can minimize some of the effects or mitigate some of these effects. So start with food, since a lot of people think about, certain diet as a way to mitigate risk. And I think there is a way that food can make a difference in our exposure to environmental toxins. You've mentioned a few, but what else would you like to say about food?
Yeah, I mean, I think the good news here is small things go a really long way. And probably the most important thing is to eat more whole foods with fewer ingredients, eating closer to the earth. This naturally reduces our processed food intake in the diet. And then we're being more mindful about packaging, which contains those plastic exposure. Second, I would say it's probably washing your fruits and vegetables and considering organic if you have that option for all of your food. If not, then we're thinking about that Dirty Dozen Clean 15 list that you can download really easily on Environmental Working Group. This helps us focus in on the foods that are highest risk for exposure. And third, it's just avoiding reheating foods in plastic or plastic lined containers. I think I already talked about before, just varying your diet too can be really important.
Yeah. Yep. Okay, good. I like all that. And what about homes? What are your sort of top suggestions for making our homes safer?
Yeah, great. I'll recap a little because I think I've mentioned a couple of things. One is air purifiers. Number one, making sure it has a basic carbon plus a HEPA filter in the unit, water filters in the home, and then taking off your shoes. This is underrated. This is huge, especially if you live in an area that sprays pesticides and you have a baby in the home or a pet. It really helps to limit bringing outdoor pollutants inside the home. And then also bring your own glass or stainless steel cup for to-go coffee or food when you can. This really limits that hot exposure to those plastic linings we were talking about. And then today, this week, go on ewg.org, look on their skin section and look up your skincare products. Look up your house cleaning products. Make sure they are safe. And be careful with the word fragrance. I use that in quotation marks over here, even though you can't see me, because there's really no protected term in health for fragrance. I would use a database to look up the products and make sure they're safe. Candles, air fresheners, things like this. And so choosing fragrance-free products.
Yeah, good advice. And that fragrance is very important. It gets a lot of so-called, I'm using air quotes too now, natural products will list even botanical or plant sounding fragrances, but they're almost all non-true botanical. Like if it's truly a botanical oil extract, it'll list the whole herb and then just say extract of it. If they put the word fragrance in there, it's almost always been synthesized in some way. So that's a good heads up. And appreciate your heads up on the shoes off too. I think that's particularly, something that people may not be as cognizant about, but is important. So, what final thoughts would you like to leave with our listeners on this topic?
Yeah, I mean, I've sprinkled this throughout because I have learned working with firefighters and first responders, this can be a little bit overwhelming. And yes, chemical toxin exposures can affect our health over time. Yes, it can increase our cancer risk. But remember, our bodies are fundamentally designed to help us detoxify. Even these small practical changes can meaningfully reduce your exposure risk and support the body's own detoxification process. The big takeaway today is that toxins can contribute to cancer risk through a few different mechanisms, especially long-term exposure. But again, we have some control over it with our everyday choices.
Yeah, I think that is an important take-home message, and I would just reiterate that it's the long-term exposure. So on the one hand, that means, oh, well, I can't do anything about the past. But really, the way to think about that is, okay, I have a bunch more time left, hopefully. So I have a lot of time. I can change the trajectory of my exposure in places where I can control it. Well, this has been such a good show, and I really appreciate you, LaDeana, for the work you're doing in this area, for the awareness that you're giving, and particularly for the work you've done with first responders and firefighters. That's just really important. Those folks just get enormous exposures through what they're doing to save lives and save buildings. So thank you for your work in that area. And I bet some of our listeners would like to find you. So where can they find you? Do you have website, social media that you can share?
Yeah, so my website is noliamed.com. So Nolia med, MED. You can join our newsletter there, and we'll have a summary up here as well where people can download a summary from these top recommendations if you choose to. And I want to say too, ihanclinics.org. This is the volunteer organization I do a lot of work with and act as the medical ambassador. And so I want to direct folks to that website if they want to learn more about the work we're doing with first responders.
And can you say both of the websites again?
I sure can. Nolia Med, NOLIAMED.com, and IHAN clinics.org.
Okay. Well, again, thank you so much for all that you are doing and have done. And I thank you, listeners, as well. And just, I hope that you hear this and you feel empowered, not disempowered. You got lots of little strategies which all add up and make a difference in your health. So with that wraps up this episode of 5 to Thrive Live. We thank our sponsors, ProThrivers Wellness Brain Formula, Cetria Glutathione, the superior glutathione to support liver and immune health, and Dr. Ohhira's award-winning shelf-stable probiotic. And you can find all of our past shows once again on ithriveplan.com or wherever you listen to your favorite podcasts. So with that, I thank you for joining us. May you each and all experience joy, laughter, and love. It is time to thrive. Have a great night.